Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today is an observance of Mental Health Awareness Month. We're also celebrating, and I mean celebrating, Mental Health Action Day. For many of us, we may not be as familiar as we might be of other acknowledgments, other observances, but that's understandable because this is only the second year for Mental Health Action Day. So you are right there on the forefront. You were there with us, and we know that together we are going to change words into actions. And tonight or today, depending on where you are, watching and listening to the members of our behavioral health team, we hope that you will formulate your own actions to benefit yourself and others. So officially welcome. Together we can change words into actions. That's our motto for this evening. I'm Thomas Stevens. I am the Manager of Communications and Marketing for Medical Advocacy and Outreach, and I am thrilled to be moderating this evening's chat. In a few short moments, we will bring several of our MAO Behavioral Health team into our chat screen so that they can engage you and each other about topics relevant to the state of mental health, as well as dive into some questions about how we can approach improving our mental health. What are the resources that we can look to, and how can we help both self and our community? So to clarify, just before we begin, we want to make sure that you understand today we are hosting a program for mental health, not to be confused with behavioral issues. Mental health is an aspect of a much broader context of behavioral health programming, and we hope that when we start to explore and dive into that, we will remember that anything that we can't see also can impact our lives. And that means how we feel, how we think, the actions we take, and all of that plays a role here. So I ask that you take that into consideration as you take part in this evening's experience. MAO Behavioral Health is a department of MAO. MAO was established in 1987, and its mission supports the overall health and well-being of individuals needing our services, including those living with HIV and substance use disorders, by delivering comprehensive health care through medical treatment, behavioral health services, social services, and health and civic education. It is the vision of MAO that every individual we serve will live a full and healthy life filled with dignity and respect. Today, MAO provides care and support services to more than 2,000 South Alabama residents spanning 28 counties or 18,675 square miles. MAO's commitment to the wellness of the entire person also serves as our inspiration for today's chat session. So I'm going to ask that each of you join me, whether you are standing in a doorway near us or whether or not you are on the phone listening, or if you are tuning in on Facebook or Twitter, to please join me in welcoming. We have the first three members of our team joining for our discussion. We have Miss Deidre Roberts. She's coming in. Everybody say hi to Deidre. She is our behavioral health program specialist. She has an extraordinary background, not just in the private sector, but also in governmental programs and how we work collectively to align pieces with the services that they need. Also, we're welcoming Betsy Sparks Brewer. She is MAO's case manager. She is also a therapist herself, and actively, as I have to say, I praise her for this. She's a lifelong student, and she herself is also able to speak from the perspective of going back to school as an adult to further advance her experience. She is truly a gem, as is Deidre, in everything we do, and you will shortly understand why. Also, please join into our screen, Mr. Glenn Winkler. Glenn is a behavioral health therapist with medical advocacy and outreach, and he has one of those rather unique experiences of often working later hours than many. So I think, if anyone has comments or observations about how, I know for myself, I'm not a morning person, I am always like fired up at night. But Glenn has a unique perspective on not just from a personal point of view, but from a work experience, what it's like to engage people after they've already worked a full day and then they have some sort of an encounter in the evening, and knowing how he manages that. So we do have other members of our team that are expected to join us shortly, but we don't want to eat up all of our time because we have three extraordinarily informative people, and we want to give them the opportunity to expand on so much about what mental health means to them. We were kind enough to have a few starting questions kind of organized for us from team members as well as our followers on Facebook and Twitter. And we narrowed down for an opening question that we're going to pose to all three people. With the many perceptions of the term crisis, how would you define the difference between a stressful situation versus an active mental health crisis? So, Glenn, you want to take that first?
To me, a crisis is a situation in which, due to a substance issue and or a psychiatric issue, someone's health, someone's safety may be at significant risk. This is a person who may or may not be intoxicated, may be experiencing psychiatric issues. In other words, neurological effects of a brain condition. And they either are presenting as suicidal, they're severely depressed, and they're not quote unquote rational, and or homicidal. They're expressing that that they're in a rage, they're in anger, they are expressing they are going to act out violently against a specific person or persons or random people. The other time I'd call it a crisis is if a person is, again, either significantly under the influence of a substance and or, to use general terms, out of it emotionally and mentally, where it's reasonably clear this person, they're not safe to be left to their own devices because you don't know what they're going to do. In my career, my past job, I did assessments for an alcohol and drug program, and it wasn't uncommon that someone would present for an assessment, sometimes brought by family members, significant others, and they were, they needed to go to the emergency room because they were not lucid enough to even really engage in a question and answer session. And so a crisis is a person who they're so out of it that they, or they're giving indication that they might harm themselves and or someone else, that they need supervision. They need, care. They need generally admission into a structured environment until something stabilizes, whether it's the substance runs its course, they need to be medically stabilized. That's my short definition of a crisis situation. The harm, the possibility of harm to someone.
Well, would either Deidre or Betsy, would you like to add to that?
I would say that, and bear with me, I'm having this laryngitis issue still, Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is that I work with a lot of the ladies here, and part of what I see is this, and this is not just limited to ladies, but most of my experience recently has been with our women who have been in domestic violence situations. So again, as Glenn pointed out, it's in those crisis situations where somebody is in imminent danger. And so imminent danger is in the domestic violence situations where, these women are seeking safety in a place where they are away from their perpetrator. So that's definitely something that we run across in our behavioral health situations. So,
Deidre, do you?
I will say in contrast to the first part of situation events, that crisis differs from that in the sense of, as Glenn and Betsy has said, the immediate presence of danger and or safety concern. That kind of differentiates between what is a need versus what is a crisis. And I know for a lot of individuals, crisis looks different depending on your point of view and perspective. Um, there are different scenarios in which a crisis may look different. In mental health and sticking with mental health, what Glenn and Betsy has pointed out would fall under mental health, but there are other crises that arise, such as homelessness, facing eviction, especially when children are involved. Those would be considered crises, but not particularly fall under mental crisis. Now, they may create a mental crisis, as Glenn pointed out, emotional instability, the anxiety of it may create a mental crisis, but those can also be considered crisis situation, but they may be situational.
Okay, that actually, you raised an excellent point, and we kind of went into this, and it was kind of my thought process too, and particularly because today is Mental Health Action Day. Is that I think for people that are at home, we'll say people that don't work in a clinical capacity, how we interpret crisis really does kind of have to um, almost require us to take a step back and realize that we have potentially like a clinical definition of crisis, but then we have a human, natural, or kind of more organic interpretation of crisis. And I think that when we're looking at how to identify and match people with resources and supports, I think that probably that differentiating between the two plays a big role in what not just a professional therapist, but even in terms of someone who's trying to lend support, what they might choose to do, what type of direction they might wish to assist the person going in. Does anybody expand on that line of thinking? Because like I said, it just seems to be like there's an organic thing, and I think we covered both. So I would just like to have those of you who actually specialized in this field elaborate on it a little bit more.
Okay, I can pick up, since I do encounter crises, especially within our agency. Um, Often because I'm the first point of contact for our department. Assessment or assessing the situation is the main point. The person for me, I have to remain calm in the situation anytime a crisis is presented. Because, like I stated earlier, a crisis may differ from mental health perspective, but assessing what the actual presenting problem is, whether I get that information from the person who I'm talking from directly, or from a doctor, or from a parent, or anyone who calls in or comes in, getting asking them direct questions. Direct questions is very important. Asking, are you thinking about committing suicide? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about hurting someone else? Where are you? What's around you? Who's around you? Those direct questions help go ahead and assess the situation. You can assess from those few questions, you can assess if, first of all, if they're able to answer the questions, if their mental capacity allows for them to answer. Also, if there's some current or direct support near them, and also the means, if they are planning to hurt themselves or someone else, the means in which they could possibly do that. You also get location. If you ask, where are you? If they say they're home, if you have access to the address, or ask them, well, where exactly is your home? Asking those direct questions. You can't be prepared for a crisis, but you kind of have to prepare yourself as much as possible, with not becoming consumed with their crisis, but more of a let's get you some help and let's get someone immediately in, because keep in mind it is a crisis, so you're on a time schedule. So immediate intervention is important, but you get there by asking those questions and assessing their situation.
And I was fortunate the last 2 years, and a lot of this was inspired because of the work that I'm given the luxury of doing alongside all of you in behavioral health, to become a medical or a mental health first aid person. And a lot of what you were saying actually, dovetails into that training that I went through, and which kind of leads me this, because you did mention about young people, and then you also brought up the whole thing about directly accessing or asking a question about related to suicide. So I would like to allow Glenn and Betsy to kind of expand on that kind of preemptive type of guideline that we could just share openly with people about, if either you're feeling a certain way or if you have a loved one, what kind of just first steps do you really think are kind of there? Because I know, like I said, you pointed out one of the biggies that was very hard for me to embrace initially, if you thought someone was being suicidal, was to actually just ask them. So, Betsy?
Well, I would say that the first question, or the first thing is like we need to educate people on the importance of asking, as Deirdre would say, the direct question, that it's okay and actually very relevant, very, very pertinent, very important to ask that question at the time. Are you thinking of killing yourself? And when you say that, yeah, it sounds harsh. But the reality of that is, when you ask somebody that, they're going to tell you. Okay, we in this little group here, we've all had to ask this question, and never once has anybody been offended that we've asked that. When you get the response, it's relief sometimes that you've actually asked. It's it is tears. It is what do we do now, or next steps, and in the maybe more difficult side of that is when you have patients who are clients who are not ready to accept what that means when they actually say, I'm thinking of hurting myself. We are the ones that will take that on for those patients and people, and it's important to educate a community that when they are educated to do that, or call upon members, or providers like us to help them in that there are people that can help there, and there are family members that will help. There are community, there are friends, there's people that can help, and they're not alone. So I think that's real important to remember. And I can't emphasize the importance of education.
Glenn, I know a lot of your specialty area really does kind of go into the areas of substance use disorder. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could kind of add to that, but from that lens.
Very much so. In my professional experience, I make a distinction between substance-induced suicidal ideation, which to me is a process of neurochemistry destabilization by the substances, which is a fancy way of saying someone isn't suicidal when they're sober, but if they get drunk or they get high, they'll experience a depressive psychosis, they'll get depressed, or they'll get upset, and impulsively they'll act on it in a moment, where and if they have easy access to means, a loaded gun, pills, where in that moment they're not necessarily, they're not quote unquote in their right mind. This is different, and this is actually to me more of a serious immediate, well, I take that back. It's in the moment, it's a more serious immediate crisis because this is a person who isn't thinking rationally and can't think rationally. You can't reason with someone who is intoxicated. You can kind of try to steer them, and be gentle and soothing and steer their thoughts to something positive, to what we call the protective factors that, keep people from acting on suicidal ideation, while at the same time, attempting to engage, to connect them with emergency services, because often they will need to go into a hospital until they, sober up. And sometimes they may not even remember this event occurred. I've done many assessments over the years on people who are like, yeah, I went to Crossbridge, which is the local, inpatient psychiatric, short-term psychiatric facility here in the Montgomery area. And they're like, they told me that I was, suicidal and threatening to kill myself and threatening to crash my car. I don't remember any of that. I just remember kind of all of a sudden I'm in Crossbridge, because, they were so under the influence that they were in what's called a blackout and don't remember this. And when you talk to them sober, they're like, no, I got kids, I got a family, I got dogs. I don't want to die. It was the drugs, it was the alcohol. However, this is different when you're talking to someone who doesn't have a substance issue, but they have a clinical depression issue. And that depression may be intensified by a number of stressors, which makes the depression all the more worse. And there, it's a different kind of neurochemical thing, that it's not substance induced, but the brain chemistry is still not, and this is something I try to use Betsy's term, to educate people to when I'm working with depressed patients, I try to get them to see that a big part of why you feel what you feel and why these thoughts are coming to your head, this is neurochemistry. This can be treated with medication. This can get better. There are logical reasons why you are in a depression, because often it's unresolved grief issues, major psychological stressors, economic, financial crises, relationship crises, life disasters, basically, that and unresolved trauma. They've already been through a lot, and the physical brain becomes depressed. It doesn't work right anymore because it's just had to, absorb so much. And I try to, explain that part of why you're feeling what you're feeling and you're having the thoughts that you are is a function of how your brain is working. And this can be treated and this can get better. It isn't changing tangible problems outside yourself. It is treating your physical brain and your nervous system to help lift it up to where it's at a more stabilized level of functioning, where we're then able to work on addressing and resolving some of the stressors. I hope that made some semblance of sense.
It did. And of course, the reality of the discussion, that's another reason why I didn't mute one of you's mic quick enough. But I think it's in some ways, though, it makes a very, although entertaining, example of how there's so much going on all the time. I mean, and even the ringing of the phone and everything while it's going on. One of the things that kind of I take, trying to be the fly on the wall, is that all of this, particularly if we're trying to step back and figure out how do we help provide guidance, not just to people for themselves, but to family members, is about withholding judgment and being a little objective. I think even if, in trying to figure out what type of steps can we make, you have to be, you have to allow yourself to be observant without passing judgment. It seems, even when you're helping someone, if there is someone that is living with a substance use disorder, or if they are managing suicidality in some way. Is that true?
Stigma attached to reaching out for quote unquote mental health services remains a major barrier. To me, my perception of reality, especially in the last several years, anxiety and depression are really, to a degree, natural, expected reactions and responses to everything that has been happening in our society for the last several years. And the term, like, I I was talking to Betsy about this yesterday. To me, professionally, I see quote unquote mental health in two ways. There are psychiatric issues, and psychiatric means there's a neurological issue that's affecting a person's emotions and thought processes. These are your bipolar disorders. This is schizophrenia. This is severe clinical depression. Now, while emotions affect neurochemistry, and generally it's not just one or the other, there does tend to be, one dominates or the other, but the other is emotional and situational factors, grief, death, loss of loved ones, end of relationships, financial problems, family problems,
COVID.
dysfunctional family issues, unresolved trauma, current trauma, what Betsy mentioned, being in toxic relationships.
Well, see, I think this is just, because I want to try to kind of narrow it to a specific point, because I think you're leading into this anyway. It's because, we've kind of talked from a very higher level point of view up until this point. But I think, we actually had a question that was a little bit maybe more hands-on or more practical related to what are some different tools that you have shared with family members and friends about mental health care or about seeking it or considering?
I can jump in. For a lot of individuals, or for individuals who are not familiar or who are unknowledgeable about mental health and are hesitant about seeking assistance, I give them just I kind of put it on a common level with them, saying things like, if you're feeling yourself snapping at people, becoming very agitated, your mood's changing, or you are noticing that you're doing things out of the ordinary, such as staying home more or not wanting to socialize with people, or if your peers and your family is saying everything okay, you seem different, reach out to someone. I'm encouraging them, even if it's not us, reach out to someone. There are so many resources out here. If you don't know where to start, you can start with us. We can link you to anyone that you need to get to. Also, tell someone you trust. Tell someone you trust, because believe it or not, when we tell someone that we trust things, they look out for you. They look out for you. They'll say, well, hey, if someone one of my close friends disclosed something to me, and even if they say, don't tell such and such, I'm I'm a nosy person, so I'm going to go research what I can have available for them, because I want to be able to help my friend. So if someone tells you as a friend or whatever, I feel like my mind ain't right, or I feel, start hitting Google, hit Google mental health near me, whatever. Alabama Department of Mental Health has a major amount of resources for our state. They have it broken down to our counties. Even, don't think that you have to, as Glenn mentioned, you have to have one of those severe psychiatric issues to seek help. Talk to someone. It may not be a weekly thing. You may not need to talk to a therapist every week. You may just need to talk to them monthly. You may end up doing a 2-hour session one time and be okay. But talk to someone, seek support groups. Support groups are really big, especially after COVID, because a lot of people felt isolated. So support groups, they have them virtual now. Seek out support groups. Those are some tools. Also, self-care. Self-care is very important. And a lot of people don't know what self-care is. Self-care is what it is. It's taking care of yourself. It is a selfish thing, and it is okay to be selfish and taking care of yourself. Do not harm others in taking care of yourself, but take care of yourself.
But
Take care of your mind.
that's like actually, I think that's a good transition point, because while we were talking, we were joined by Dr. Will Rutland. Thank you so much, Dr. Will.
Oh, it's so good to see y'all.
Thank you. We Deidre was expanding on kind of some subject area that really we were trying to bubble into this kind of question of what are some different tools that you would share with family members and friends about mental health care. And you came in like towards the end of it, but I think it provides a perfect opportunity because the nature of your approach as a therapist, as a psychiatrist, may add something different, more at least in terms of definition, because I know you'll agree. But when we talk about self-care, would you mind expanding on that and literally talk about, like, for instance, how have you translated that to clients that you've worked with?
That's a great question, Thomas. Thank you so much. And Deidre, that was excellent. I love everything you just said. So nailed it. But when I'm speaking to clients, there's been kind of a buzzword out there recently that y'all have probably heard in different places. And it's this idea of mindfulness and sort of checking in with ourselves and sort of slowing down enough to be where our feet are, as my grandfather used to say, be where your feet are. And that's it's a nice way to think about mindfulness, is being present in that moment. And so I'll often talk about self-care from a position of mindfulness and being kind to yourself in much the same way Deidre was just describing. It is selfish, but you're allowed. And kindness, not only to those around you, but also inwardly to yourself. But of course, then my patients will often say, well, okay, great, Dr. Rutland, that all sounds good, but what does that mean? What does it mean to be mindful? And so there are some concrete things that you can do that I think really help you kind of come back into yourself and out of all the chaos of the world. Because let's be honest, the last couple of years, well, honestly, it feels like the last 40 years for me, but certainly the last couple of years have been quite chaotic. And so it sometimes takes a technique to get out of that chaos and back into ourselves. And so I have a couple of those that I talk about, and some of y'all may have heard me speak about these before. One of my very favorites these days is what I call sensory attunement. And this is a way to tune your mind in to what's going on around you, almost like you used to tune your old school radio. You remember that, when you had to turn the knob and like get onto the right frequency? Well, the same thing goes on here. There is so much going on in our mind these days because of all of the stresses out there that we can start to almost get consumed with what's going on here and forget about what's going on out there. And a nice way to draw ourselves out of our minds and out of our worries and out of our stresses is to turn our attention to our senses, our five senses, like literally taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. And spending a few minutes paying attention to our senses can really get us out of our heads and into the real world and into the present moment. So the one that I always use for myself, and I use this technique all the time, because occasionally life gets stressful here in New Haven, Connecticut. I love using my sense of hearing, especially at this time of year, because the birds are migrating. And so there's beautiful bird sounds around. But if you just took a second, even while we're here in the chat together, anybody who's out there in the audience, take a second and close your eyes and just think, what am I hearing right now? So for instance, in my room, I'm hearing the kind of the fan whir of my laptop computer, and I can hear the traffic on the street behind me, and I can hear the hum of the fluorescent light that's here in the room adjacent to me. None of that is rocket science, but it did take my mind outside of my worries and into the world in a very real and present way. If you can spend just a few minutes tuning into your senses every day, that will bring you some calm and perspective. That can be really nice and restorative. You can do the same thing with touch. You guys will know this is an old trick we used to prescribe to people, is when you're feeling overwhelmed, go into your ice box and get a piece of ice and hold it in your hand. And that will force you to pay attention to your sense of touch. And it will break that anxiety or worry, because you'll be thinking about, man, this is a cold piece of ice in my hand. And it sort of stops that cycle of worry, at least long enough for you to take a step backwards. Some people, I don't know if y'all remember these. I think they were called super lemons or atomic fireballs, these little hard candies. Yes.
Yeah.
I have patients, I actually used to have a mentor who carried those in his pocket of his medical coat, so his white coat. And if things got overwhelming, he would have an atomic fireball, and that will draw your attention to your sense of taste. Anyway, these are little techniques. I don't know that they're helpful. Hopefully they will be, but that's a nice way to bring you back into the moment. And so that's something that you can do. The other one I use a lot with my folks around mindfulness is something that I call measured breathing. Or if you've ever been in a session with me before, you may have heard me call it 5 by 5 by 5 breathing. And basically that is taking 5 minutes out of your day to breathe in a certain pattern. And that pattern is to breathe in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds, and in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds. And if you can do that for 5 full minutes, by the end of that 5 minutes, you're going to feel less stressed, whether you like it or not. And it turns out, and I won't bore y'all with the details, but there is a connection between the upper left chamber of your heart, which is called the left atria, and the stress centers in your brain. And that connection is always measuring the amount of pressure in the heart. And if that pressure goes up, it tells your brain, ooh, we're under stress, send off cortisol and adrenaline and all of these stress molecules, the things you hear about that are stress hormones. And if the pressure in the left atrium goes down, it sends a signal to the brain that says, we're calm, everything's great, it's going grand. And a way to trick your heart into having less pressure in that chamber is to breathe 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And if you can do it for 5 minutes, then whether your brain likes it or not, it's going to calm you down. And so that's a nice kind of hack. You can get around your stress by breathing in that cadence for about 5 minutes. So those are some practical ways that people can practice mindfulness. So I talk about that a lot. And that's a self-care. The other thing that I love is do what you love. If you love listening to music, listen to music. If you love being in nature, go be in nature. If you love reading books, go read a book. Do what you love and don't beat yourself up about it. We are all beholden to the people that we love and the people that we care for and to our jobs and our families and our communities. But give yourself some time on your calendar. So literally put it on the calendar. Say, okay, on Sundays from 1:30 to 2:30, I'm going to listen to music, and then do it. You deserve that time. You're given I always tell people there are 168 hours in a week. You can have 30 minutes of that. Everybody else can have 167 and a half hours. Fine, give it to them. But take 30 minutes for yourself and do something you love. Watch bad TV. I love watching bad TV. Oh, if y'all saw my Netflix playlist, I'd be so embarrassed I couldn't come back on the program anymore. But watch bad TV, do whatever you want to do, but give yourself some time to do what you love. So between that and a little mindfulness and some self-care, that usually helps folks kind of get into a calm space.
Well, what you were saying, truthfully, is I think hitting straight through the social media and everything, because it really is. We see it's being chimed in from several people.
Okay.
Literally almost word for word. Katriana says, yes, do what you love. I think a lot of that really is something that it seems shocking to most people, but we do have to kind of be reminded of that. I think it's very easy for most of us to not see that simple but critical piece is to be reminded to be able to do something and do what you love. We do have a question that kind of relates to this, as well as another I had already posted before you joined us, Dr. Ruckman. But one of our Facebook followers says, how do you prevent someone going into crisis, especially if the person does not recognize? They went on to say, for example, thoughts but no plans for suicide are not immediate crisis, but immediate intervention may prevent it.
So right. Yeah, that's a great question. And I get this question, as you might imagine, a lot from my medical students and my medical residents who are new to medicine, and they're just dealing with this stuff for the first time. And it's terrifying, to see someone you care about who's sort of teetering on the edge of danger, and it creates inside of us anxieties. And what I always tell them is, you will never blame yourself, or your friend or loved one will never blame you for keeping them safe. So err on the side of caution. If that little voice inside of you says something doesn't feel right about this, then intervene. And if that means, calling them up and saying, I'm worried about you, I'm coming to your house right now, or, telling their parents or telling their friends, or whoever it is you need to tell to keep them safe. Job number one is keep them safe. No one's ever going to blame you for keeping somebody safe. And so if you're having that thought like, oof, they're having suicidal thoughts, but they say they're not planning anything, that's enough. That's enough. It's enough for you at least to call the question and say, hey, friend, loved one, you're saying things that are frightening me, and I care about you, and I want to keep you safe. And so I need you to tell me how we can do that and kind of work through it. But I wouldn't delay. I know that feels hard. My medical students, they're so much more savvy than me. It's incredible. Young people are so savvy these days, but they'll often say, oh, look, Dr. Rutland, you're an old fogey. The people can take care of themselves and you don't need to be intervening in their lives. And there is something to that. There is certainly autonomy at play here. But when the stakes are someone's health or safety, better to keep them safe and work through everything afterwards than to not keep them safe and then have to live with kind of whatever the consequences can be, because it is dangerous. I think something we forget is this stuff can be, depression can be lethal. Bipolar depression in particular can be lethal. Mania can be lethal. And so just like any other lethal illness, we would never say, that person has sepsis. Let's see, can we wait one more day to give them antibiotics? We would never say that. We would say, no, oh my gosh, we got to get them an IV of vancomycin immediately. And the same is true here. Could you make it another day? Who knows? Don't risk it. Do it now and sort of sort it out on the back end.
I would like to do kind of a round robin, and yes, I'm purposely allowing this to run a little longer because.
Sorry, guys.
No. We were fortunate that Dr. Rutland was able to do this, and again, if our viewers, our followers didn't pick up on it, he literally is remote. He is in Connecticut, so Yahoo for technology.
Right.
Even though he's there, we work with Dr. Rutland consistently, and he works with our clients that come into MAO either by way of behavioral health or by way of the Copeland Care Clinic, and we find out that there are additional supports that they need. But one of the things that is all too, I think, familiar with everyone is the state of COVID. And I think it's one of those things that, we could dance around or not. I think particularly living true to Mental Health Action Day, I think the question that I have that someone posed is truly relevant, and it cuts through regardless of how anyone feels. I think, again, we all can see this. For people who have lost family members and friends to COVID, what suggestions would you provide for dealing with grief and loss? Because I think a lot of what we've talked about in some way, shape, or form, there's an element of loss or there's an element of grief. Something is in there. And of course, we have this case example now with COVID, and it's almost, hard to comprehend the scale of people's loss.
Yeah.
Who wants to start? Betsy, you want to start? And that will give Dr. Rutland a moment to think. Oh, I think, are you muted still? There you go.
Well, Thomas, I have dealt with this personally during COVID. I've lost a personal friend, and I lost my uncle, who was a CB in World War II. My aunt and uncle were married for God knows, 70-something years. And so the loss that I saw my aunt experience, who wasn't able to be with my uncle, was devastating. And so I personally had to deal with that vicariously for her. And so to help her through that, it was a willingness to be present for her. And so talking to my patients about grief and loss during COVID too. I was, willing to sit in that difficult space of grief and loss and have them tell me the story, and also be able to find ways that they um, could have those grief experiences, celebrate their loved one. Sometimes we talked about going to restaurants that their loved one liked to go to. Sometimes it was actually going to the cemetery and having conversations with their loved one in the cemetery. Sometimes it was even having those conversations in a technique that we call the empty chair right here in the office, being able to talk about the things that we wanted to say that we weren't able to say because we couldn't be there with them. So, so that was real important to me too, and the loss of my friend that I experienced, and I miss him terribly. And I wasn't able to tell him goodbye, but I was able to be with friends of mine and celebrate his life and get together and remember those good things. And so I was able to take my own personal experience and share that with my family, with my patients, with my friends, because we're all collectively, I think we all know somebody who lost somebody during this pandemic. And so as we collectively, grieve those losses, I think that we have become more maybe compassionate towards each other and understand what it's really live, what is important in the here and now, like Dr. Rutland was saying, being present. So that's what I have to say about that.
Deidre, do you want to add before Will speaks?
Yeah, I will. And a lot of what Betsy was saying, but to add on also, I know with COVID, grief and loss kind of took a broader definition. It was not just placed to people, it was also placed to jobs, homes, opportunities, and all of that. So, a lot of people experience different forms and levels of grief and loss due to COVID. And because of that, there have and this is kind of a fortunate, unfortunate situation. It has given birth to new levels of support, new levels of support, group support, virtual, in person, especially in person now, because with grief, one of the aspects is loneliness. So, in person groups now, our support groups are available. Um, a lot of people, well, not a lot, but some people will prefer a support group than a individual therapist or counselor. And I know, as my team know, I love groups. With groups, you get a shared camaraderie. You get that you are understand that those individuals who are present share in your experience because that's why they're there. They have experienced something similar, and so it's such a profound experience and profound tool in helping individuals with grief. You have individuals who are recently dealing with grief in group, and you have individuals who have gone past a certain part of grief. They're now, they may have still miss their individual or situation, but they have found hope, and so they provide a level of comfort and hope and support to that individual that honestly can't be it can't be put into definition. So support groups are very, very important in grief and loss. I know it's a difficult process when you're in the grieving process, to seek out assistance, but it is very important. It's important to know that you're not alone. I don't think there's ever been one situation that only one person has ever went through in life.
I
There is
think,
someone out there who has similar experience with you, and so you're not alone.
I think that is another important little gem of wisdom that we've heard it. I mean, generationally, we hear it, but I think, yeah, we've reached a point where we really have to internalize that little fact point more, is that we may feel alone, but that does not necessarily mean we are alone. So now that, because I know Dr. Rutland was kind of sliding in between clients, so I wanted to give him a moment to breathe. So do you want to pick up from there and elaborate?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. And I'm reminded that I think I have another patient who's maybe waiting for me even as we speak. So I probably won't stay too long. But I will offer this. First off, I so deeply resonate with everything y'all have said, Betsy. That idea of the empty chair exercise is so powerful for folks. And I'm grateful to you to have been reminded of it. And Deidre, I love your analogy of the connection in COVID. There is a connection there, right? This is something that we have globally experienced simultaneously and with many of the same sort of fears: our own mortality, the destruction of social systems, financial systems, everything. I remember I was asked to write a paper right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was about the interconnectivity of the sort of epidemiology of the virus. And I started it by talking about the pangolin and the bat. I don't know if y'all remember this, but our best theory on how COVID starts with these two small creatures, a bat, literally a bat, and a pangolin, and sort of these are two what they call zoonotic illnesses, two animal illnesses that sort of commingled and created a human virus and then infected a few people in China and then out into the world. And I wrote the paper because it was stunning to me, and it's still stunning to me, that my whole life has changed in the last 2 years. Y'all's whole lives have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. Everyone's whole lives have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. And it seems to all be related to a bat that weighs about 20 grams and a pangolin, which is about the size of a Yorkshire Terrier somewhere in China. That's how connected we are. Is like these two random creatures 15,000 miles away happen to cross paths with one another. And now everyone on this call, our entire lives have changed. So that's how connected we are. And that's something that COVID has really brought out to me. But before I get to talking about pangolins too much, the question was about grief. And so let me turn to grief. Because of my role, I am often asked about grief in the context of a diagnosis. So am I depressed, Dr. Rutland? My child passed away, my grandmother passed away, my best friend passed away, my husband or wife passed away. Is this depression? And so oftentimes I'm talking to folks about diagnoses. And really, it is usually my goal, one, to normalize the grieving process, because it is a normal, healthy human response to loss, and also to provide some hope at the end of it. And so the way that I often do that is, you can correlate your attachment to someone with the deepness of your grief. So if you have loved someone or you have attached to someone deeply, then it is only natural that you would grieve that loss, because it is a grief also of yourself. That is a piece of your own life that has now passed away too. And so you love that person, and they brought out some of the best things about you, and now you are grieving the loss of that. And that's normal. And I always tell people that you are allowed to be just as wacky as you want to be for 12 whole months before I'm going to worry about you a bit. So if that means you want to stay up late at night and sing their favorite song until 2 a.m, or if you want to wear their t-shirt every day for 3 months, or whatever it is, whatever you need to do to connect with that piece that you've lost, it's totally fine with me until we get to 12 months. Once we get to 12 months, we start to think about, okay, do we have a diagnosis in here somewhere? So then the next part of the conversation usually goes something like this. But the way to tell if things are going as expected and as is healthy, or if things are going a little bit off the rails, is to watch the sort of tone of your memories about that loved one. At the beginning, everything about them is going to hurt. Every memory you have, the first time you hear their favorite song, you're going to cry. When you see, their clothes in the closet, or, whatever it is, whatever reminder it is, it's going to hurt. That hurts. But over time, you're going to see, or hear their favorite song rather, And rather than immediately hurting, you're going to remember that time that you and your buddy sang that song at the top of your lungs with the windows down. And it's that replacement of these painful memories with more almost joyful memories, with happier remembrances. That means that you are healing appropriately. And so as long as that starts to occur within a year, I don't worry one bit about grief. I think grief is normal. It's happy, and it's a way to let go of people that we have loved and by whom we have been loved. And so it is necessary, but it is not necessarily pathological, if that makes any sense.
I just want to understand before we know you have to run off because you have a client meeting. Is it at 5:30, Deidre?
It's at 5.
Oh, it's 5. Okay. Well, I think Glenn, Betsy, and Deidre can all probably equally respond to this question that I'm about to pose, because I don't want to tie you or the client up anymore.
Sure.
But you can chime in if I'll leave it on you. But basically, we have a question which was kind of reiterated in 2 different ways, but it really is geared towards the professionals, the care providers that are watching and viewing. And it really is something that I know we continue to keep revisiting these days in COVID, the fact that we work with people living with HIV often at MAO. And this is about the caregiver. So basically, as a professional trying to provide support for behavioral and mental health needs of people, how do helpers minimize secondary trauma? So who wants to grab that one? I heard some sighs, and that was pretty much my reaction when I saw the question the first time, but it's been asked more than once. So who wants to take that? Glenn?
What helps me is over the years, I've learned to be able to set a healthier boundary with my vocation. And when it's time for me to go home, my anxiety, my concern about the people with whom I work, I pick it up when I walk back through the door. When you leave your place of work, you need to be able to leave your work at your workplace. And it is all right for you to have a life outside of your job that you look forward to being involved in and to love being in. And you're not a bad person if you're able to compartmentalize things that you can't control and take care of yourself and enjoy your life when you're not on the clock. And I think every mental health professional has to find a system that works for them with regard to that. And everyone, it'll be a little different. And, I have to practice thought stopping techniques, similar to what Dr. Rutland was saying before. I'll find my mind drifting to this issue or that issue, and I'm like, can you do anything about this right now? No. You need to make yourself think about something else. Disengage from this thought process, focus on, the moment, and know that I'll deal with this when I walk in the door tomorrow. So being able to compartmentalize and disengage from our vocation in our personal lives, for me, that is one of the most relevant, self-care things that helps me rejuvenate and be able to, do this. The other thing I'll say is where I used to work many years ago, the administration at that time, they forced their counselors to take a week's vacation every 3 months. It was mandatory. They're like, you don't build up your time. You have to take a week of leave. And the reason they did that was they're like, we have found that, professionals need that time. And there are a lot of counselors who have some, they're go-getters, they're, crusaders, they're driven people, and they're workaholics. We make people take leave because we find the stress builds up. So, but I think that's, everyone, again, like I said, everyone has to find a system that works for them. but being able to take that personal time and be mindful in your personal time and focus on it, and not, be back worried about, this and that.
So
That's my take on it.
Only because, again, because all of this is really just, my head thinks this way all the time. So being able to listen to all of you, actually, it's like consuming the best food in the world. But I don't want to stretch it out too much, because I think that, we could just keep going on this evening, and we're going to encourage our viewers and listeners, if you would like to see more chat sessions like this, just shoot us an email. You can send it to info@maoi.org. Again, if you can't pick that up, then you can just kind of basically do some version of my name, and I'll still get it. There you are. There's my name. Because all of our email addresses are first initial, last name, and maoi.org. But I just want to kind of allow each of you quickly to respond to a closing question. And I mean, again, this is not elaborate. What is one action step that you would like to encourage viewers to take to promote better mental health?
I'll jump in on that one too.
Okay.
What we in the counseling field call positive self-talk. What you say to yourself in your head, the way you talk to yourself when you're, responding to situations or thinking about things, it can be positive or negative. And an example of negative self-talk is putting yourself down, insulting yourself, like, you're too fat, you're stupid, you're a fake, you're a fraud, you're this, you're that, you're not a good person. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to someone that you loved and respected, a beloved family member, partner, best friend. No matter what your problem is, talk to yourself the way you would talk to someone that you loved who had that problem. You wouldn't put that person down. You wouldn't insult that person. You wouldn't make a joke of that person's feelings. Learn to not do that to yourself. When your self-talk is positive, your anxiety and your depression will alleviate some.
Okay.
It's like a spell you cast on yourself.
Who wants to pick up there?
Well, I'll pick up with what Glenn just said. What I tell my patients is quit shooting all over yourselves.
Okay.
And then they always remember it. But I also, again, along those lines, I wore my stigma-free t-shirt on purpose today, and recognizing, that we need to create open space for those conversations. And the more that we have to practice those conversations if we haven't had them. And the more we talk about it, the more we open those lines of communications and make it available to, people that we care about, and also for ourselves, so that we are more comfortable when these things come up in our lives, that we quit beating ourselves up. And as Deirdre said, we practice self-care, and we do take care of ourselves, and we start making ourselves a priority.
I would say, and this is a phrase that I found that I love and agree with, is be kind to your mind. And it's not just as simple as being kind, like it encompasses everything Bessie and Glenn saying. Be kind to your mind is talking positive to yourself. It's giving yourself a break. Give yourself a break. It's okay to not hit the mark all the time. It's okay to feel every emotion that naturally occurs in the human body, because we are humans. We are not robots. And self-care. I can't stress self-care enough. A lot of people, like I said earlier, don't really know what it is. Research, ask questions, ask individuals, how do they say self-care? Self-care is not something you can just start today and it works. You have to practice it. It needs to become a part of who you are. So for a mental health action, for those who are working out there, when you take your day off work, take your day off work. Do not go to a doctor's appointment. Do not run errands for anyone. Take your day off work. Use your time for yourself. Do that. It's very important. So that would be my action. Take time for yourself. Treat
And Dr.
yourself
Ruckman?
nice.
Yes, well, I have very little to add. That y'all hit all the high points. I mean, it's just being kind to yourself is so important, and whether that's positive self-talk or not self-stigmatizing or just practicing kindness. So I won't add much. I think the two things I would say as action items: practice gratitude. Practice gratitude, even in dismal situations. Try to find something about which to be grateful. And it's hard to do, so it does take practice. But gratitude can be really powerful. And then something that I'm working on myself these days, I read this conversation between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, who are these two incredible people, right? And it was about finding happiness. And something that they both said that they had to really practice was finding humor. The world can feel so dark and so hard that we forget about humor. And so the Dalai Lama, who is this, kind of jolly looking guy, he actually had to train himself to laugh. But try to laugh, find humor, seek out humor, even when it's absurd. Like when you end up needing to get somewhere in a rush and you hit literally every red light between where you are and where you're going. Like that happens. That's a thing. And find humor in that. Like that's absurd. But if you can find that humor and teach yourself to laugh, that can really help your overall sort of global mental health.
Well, I would like to thank all of you, Dr. Rutland, Glenn, Betsy, Deidre, and all of our colleagues and peers who really contribute to what we do every day to help the lives of so many, and to our viewers, our followers, our participants on Facebook and Twitter for joining us. If you would like to see other chat sessions like this hosted by MAO Behavioral Health or even other areas of MAO, please email me at info@maoi.org. As we transition out of this evening's chat, there's a brief little inspirational video that I'm going to play for you, courtesy of our national friends who are all committed today to turn words into actions for Mental Health Awareness Day. And then you will also find a simple little slide that will come on your screen, and I will leave it there for about 5 minutes. In case you are like me, I write very slow. Just in case you do need assistance, there are numbers out there to call. There are people 24 hours a day. If that is when you need somebody, there are numbers for you to call. And there's so much work being done. And of course, in addition to calling MAO, which you can always reach somebody, either our answering service or a live human being, you can reach somebody at 800-510-4704. That will also be repeated on the slide. But also you will see that there are even numbers within our state. Alabama has an extraordinary team of people working for the Alabama Department of Mental Health, and they coordinate and disseminate information, and they also have a list of helplines to address anyone from feelings of loss, grief, suicidality, or even domestic abuse in difficult situations, because it is going to take all of us working together to change and make mental health and behavioral concerns not judged, to remove the stigma and allow all of us to work together to improve people's lives. So again, thank you all. Thanks to our panel. And again, thank you for joining us. Medical Advocacy and Outreach. Bye, everybody.
Take a moment today to take action to support your mental health. It's easier than you think.
Last May, the world came together for mental health.
To everyone who is struggling with their mental health, you're not alone. There's no shame in seeking help.
To shift culture from awareness to action.
Today is Mental Health Action Day.
We all have mental health.
What will you do to support yours?
I'll go first.
This year, more than 1,400 media, retail, and nonprofit partners from around the globe will join forces on Thursday, May 19th, to make this Mental Health Action Day even bigger.
Knowing that there are resources out there to get help if you need it.
Because mental health is health.
Make time to connect with yourself,
All right, let's do a little meditation.
with loved ones,
I am beautiful. I'm beautiful. I am smart. I'm smart.
and with your community.
Sometimes it's just about reaching out to a friend.
What you have to understand is you're not alone, and you don't need to be alone.
Take action and join us for Mental Health Action Day on Thursday, May 19th.
Bye-bye, everybody.